I do not hear a song.
That's because I hadn't
There
started
it is.
Oh, yes. Here we are on the porch, the Philadelphia Sports Porch once again. Welcome. You are watching live on video on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and X. And of course, if you don't want to watch live, you can always catch the podcast. We're going to drop the podcast right after the show on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you get your
Flippin' podcasts.
Yeah, what's with the flipping? Why isn't it friggin' Schwaber?
I'm throwing some new stuff out there. I'm seeing
All right,
seeing what works, seeing what
All
doesn't.
right, well, it's not working. Anyway, welcome to the show. Of course, what do we do here? We talk Philadelphia sports, and boy, we got a lot of talking to do after this past weekend. Actually, after the last two games, I think, if I'm not mistaken, boys. But of course, I have the Grand Schwabini coming to me remote from his studios in Indiana Township, Pennsylvania, which he likes to call Fox Chapel because it makes him sound wealthy. And from Austin, Texas. Is it Austin, Rube?
Yeah.
Round Rock, just north of Austin. Yep.
Just north of Austin, Texas. Rube with his PHL shirt on, coming to us remote, and Dawkins in the background, of course. So
I got this on.
Yep. Yeah. Well, we got a lot to talk about. We're going to talk. We do this in pages because Mark wrote notes last year, and he wrote them like a book: page 1, page 2, page 3. So, of course, we're going to talk about the Eagles and what is going on there. Really, what is going on? It's Redtober again. The Phillies are back in the playoffs after clinching the East, looking to make it all the way this time. They got some tough competition though. And then Mitchkov Mania, we're going to get into that a little bit. And I guess the Knicks pulled off a surprise trade. And then we're gonna do a little tribute to Dikembe Mutombo. What a name! What a name! So, Schwaber, I'm going to let you start it all off. We're going to go right to page 1, unless you've got something else you want to talk about. Page 1.
No. Let's
plucked by the Bucks.
Yes, the Eagles' feathers were plucked by the Bucks again. Coming fresh off a utterly dominated performance of the Buccaneers in the playoff game. We basically pretty much saw the same exact thing. Now look, okay, so all right, you didn't have your two best wide receivers, AJ Brown and Devontae Smith. You didn't have Lane Johnson. So yeah, were they a little bit reeling on the offensive side of the ball? Sure. But for me, this was just a very concerning game. I mean, because you come out clearly not ready to play. You get down 24-0. And look, what happens when you get down 24-0? They had a shot to come back. It was 24-14. And then they're driving the ball, but you leave yourself no room for error when you go down 24-0. And it was just like all the bad things from the last half of last year were there. Poor tackling, can't get to the quarterback. Coaching seemed to be lacking. A lot going on now. And I'll get to you in one sec, Rube, here. But let's also not forget the fact that we took off last week, and then last week was the complete opposite. We're going up against the number one offense in the league, who had scored 40 points in 2 games in a row, and we completely shut them down. Like, we have a good defense. Right. So it's very confusing. It's a very up and down team. And I'm just sort of beginning to think that, they're probably not that good. I think that they're just maybe a slightly above average team. So what's your thoughts, just kind of thoughts on the game, Rube?
Yeah. And Mark, I think you said it very well, and it's inconsistent. You don't know what you're going to get week to week, other than either one, a game that is too close, than a game that's closer than it needs to be, or two, we just don't show up, or we look out coached, not classed. And so you had that the last 2 weeks with the Saints game. Where did the defense come? All of a sudden, our defense woke up. Our offense struggled a little bit, but we figured out a way to win that game. Unlike the week before that, that we figured out how to lose that game against Atlanta. That seemed like the whole that game against the Saints seemed like a whole microcosm of the entire first half of last year. And then the Tampa Bay game a week later looks like the entire second half of last year. So what are you going to get? So just inconsistent. And I don't know whether the inconsistency is due to the coaching or whether it is due to uh, just, I think on paper, we think we're a little better than we really are. Listen, we talk about an offensive line that's supposed to be the best with the best coaching, and we give up what 15 pressures yesterday and
Yes, 6
what
sacks.
6 sacks.
Mm-hmm.
Unacceptable. We both had to play in the heat, so I don't want to hear that excuse. Just I don't know what to do with this team, and I'm
Yeah.
with you, Schwabi.
So
I'm
so
worried.
he- so here's what I thought would be a good kind of exercise for us here. Uh Ranking, with number 1 being the most important. From 3 to 1, what would you say are the biggest concerns that the Eagles have right now?
Three, one being the biggest concern.
Yes.
Start with three.
Yeah.
Uh, Three, I would say the coaching. I'm losing faith in Sirianni and tired of hearing the same thing every week around. It starts with me. And listen, it's enough already. It starts with me. Um, I hold him accountable. Listen, we've got an offense, another set of new coordinators supposedly that we're going to get creative and that we're experienced. But man, I don't see any of that creativity on the field. Certainly not from the defense. And if it wasn't for Saquon and in our rushing game, uh, golly, I don't know what to say. No, yeah, did it hurt to not have AJ and Devontae this week? Yeah, but we should be talented enough to be able to play with the Buccaneers without them. So I would say coaching number three.
Okay. Now I'm going to give you my number 3.
Okay.
My number 3, I'm going to say, is the defense. Um, from what I saw against the Saints, it's clear to me that there is enough skill to have a good defense with these players. The problem that I foresee is that for whatever reason they're either not prepared, which I would sort of doubt that a little bit, um, simply because Vic Fangio is the D coordinator and he's got a heck of a record in this league. But I think really it's more a motivation factor. I mean, like, Jalen Carter and Davis were, like, men obsessed last week against the Saints. They completely dominated the line of scrimmage. And it's just like they didn't even show up yesterday. How does
No,
that happen?
nobody
You
showed up
know?
yesterday. And if I'm going to be perfectly honest, and Chris, I know you want to get the take in, but I got to just say this to our audience. Uh, After 14 nothing, I turned it off and found something better to do with my Sunday because I've seen it. Because I've
Cool.
seen it. We've seen it. We're like, they're down
That's
14.
telling.
They're not coming back. I'm as diehard of an Eagle fan as there is. I didn't want it to ruin the
Dude,
rest of my day.
actually,
It was awful.
well, actually, if you would have watched like me, it would have ruined the rest of your day because no, seriously,
Yeah.
there was a point in the third quarter where we were down like 15 points and we had the ball, I think, at like the 15-yard line, and we score there and it's a one-score game. I mean, we had we, as bad as they played, they had a legitimate shot to come back and win, and of course they just throw it away. It was
Good
garbage.
segue. I'm going to come back to that one, but Chris, please.
Yeah.
I'm gonna give you a little bit of a different take on my third concern. My number 3 concern is actually Jalen Hurts, and we could talk about AJ Brown not being in the game, Devontae Smith not being in the game. But really, those two guys going down, and then I look here, and your top receiver was Dallas Goedert, who had 7 receptions for 62 yards. I think that when you have a guy like Jalen Hurts in the game who has the talent that he has, that good quarterbacks or great quarterbacks, not saying he's not good at all, but great quarterbacks, they find a way to win because they look at the next man up. And if you've got guys that are pros running routes, you should be able to find an open man. You should be able to manage that game. So I actually have a concern about Jalen Hurts now going forward, especially after the win over New Orleans, in which they only managed 15 points, but the defense seemed to show up. So I'll keep that one short. My number 3 concern is Jalen Hurts.
Okay.
Well,
and we also have Steve DeFlitch coming in at number 3 with injuries. And that is true. I mean, you could put that in there, but there's always going to be injuries, right? So Rube, what and Steve says real fans have their Sundays and Mondays ruined because let's face it,
he's talking about 2 games. But anyway.
Well, so all right, so Rube, what's your number 2?
Yeah, Chris, I agree with you, but I'll put it a little higher on the list. I think Jalen Hurts is ineffective. 4 passing TDs and 4 interceptions. You can't have the same number of interceptions than you do passing touchdowns and expect to be considered an even good quarterback in this league, let alone elite.
Right.
I think defenses have figured him out. I think I had great hope the first couple of years. Obviously, he played at an MVP level, even last year for half the season. But there's a reason Alabama gave up on him in the middle of a national championship game in college, and that he had to transfer. And there's a reason he wasn't a top, around pick. And I think we're starting to see some of that stuff come to fruition. Let me ask you this, Schwabi, Chris, when's the last time you saw him drop back and go 3-step drop and pass the ball and get it out of his hands?
He does that to AJ Brown on slants.
Okay. So if AJ Brown's not in the game, they're terrible, right? There was some ridiculous stat that came out the other week. I hate to say it, but I don't think he's the long-term answer for us to be the quarterback of our
league. 18 of 30 for 158 yards and a 5.3 yard pass per attempt. That's not going to get it done.
No,
that's not going to get it done.
Okay, well, I'll then go into my number 2, which my number 2 also is Jalen Hurts. But I look at it a little bit differently than you guys do. What I think I now realize about Jalen Hurts is that Jalen Hurts can be elite, but he needs the right partner to be elite. And to me, what that means is Shane Steichen was the guy that got the most out of him. And what we're doing right now is we're just sort of expecting him to be elite without coaching him to be elite. And what I mean by that is, like take a look, for example, at like this young quarterback, Jaden, was it Jaden Daniels with the Redskins or the Commanders? Okay. So let's take a look at him. Like he's putting up some incredible numbers, right? But it's so well coached. It's like, one of the games, I don't know, I think he ended up throwing close to like 300 yards, but he had like in the middle of the third quarter, he had thrown like 7 passes. He was like 7 for 7. You know what I mean? And I just like go back to like, that great year in 2022 with Jalen Hurts, and like, really remember, like we were very much like a running team, and we really leaned heavily on the run. And we did a lot more with Hurts with his legs, and getting positive plays from Jalen in that regard, which really kept the defenders kind of on edge. Now we just say, hey, just slide down. You're too important. You can't get hurt. So we give up plays all the time, right?
Hey Schwab,
We
you want to know the big difference? Sorry to interrupt. You want to know the big difference between the Super Bowl year and the last couple of years? Our defense was dominant. We didn't need Jalen to win games. We just needed him to be good and manage the game. Our defense is so ineffective now. We are relying too much on him to win the ball game for us, and I think I do believe Steichen was a difference maker, but golly, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but kind of what I'm getting at here though is, like there are plays now. The biggest problem that Jalen Hurts has had since midway through the last season to a quarter through this season is the turnovers, right? Now some of those are on him, like, and I think part of that's not having really the best feel in the pocket of when the rush is getting close to him. But also part of it is coaching. Part of it is, hey, you got to have a clock, 1, 2, 3, get the ball out. Part of it is what's the play design. There are games where we don't even know that Dallas Goedert's on the team. And he's available for like a 5 to a 15-yard catch like every single play, which would come out in 2 seconds, right? Those are the plays that they're running to like Jaden Daniels. You know what I mean? And I think that sometimes we get caught up in, it's not good to be a game manager when actually, if you're a game manager, you can really win and really put up incredible numbers. And I think that's what they've kind of gotten away from. They're just letting him just kind of freelance, and it's not working.
Okay, so let's recap before I give my number 2. Rube, you were number 3 was coaching.
Coaching, yeah.
Number 2 was defense.
Number 2 was Jalen Hurts for me.
Jalen Hurts, thank you. Schwaber, you were number 3 was
3 defense, 2 Jalen Hurts.
2 Jalen Hurts. My number 2 is the defense. Where is it? I mean, it's just that simple. Now, it's easy to say, well, they stopped, New Orleans. They held them to 12 points and they eked out a win there. But, I also go back to the fact that last year in the playoffs, Tampa Bay really had their numbers. So that's Tampa Bay matching up well against the Eagles and coming up with a game plan that stops the Eagles and keeps their defense off balance. So I don't know that you can really, I want to fault the defense. But I go back to the Atlanta game and it's like, where was the defense at the end of the game? So, I don't think the defense is playing up to the ball. I think they're too soft. I think they're leaving a lot of passing lanes open. I think at times they look confused and they're not getting enough pressure on the quarterback. If you think about it, the last 3 games, the Green Bay game doesn't really count, but the last 3 games they've played against quarterbacks who are not, David Carr is mobile for the kind of quarterback he is, but he's not really a mobile quarterback. So the last 3 games they've played against quarterbacks who are classic drop back NFL passers. Where was the pressure? That's key. So for me, it's Jalen Hurts and then the defense.
And Steve DeFlitch chimes in with number 2 is the defense for him.
Defense. Now he uses the word
pathetic.
Pathetic, which if your defense is allowing 30 points in a game and not keeping you in the first half and letting Atlanta march down the field with an injured Kirk Cousins and score in the last second, that does look pathetic, especially when the defense was supposed to be a strong point on your team. So we are in agreement.
All right, and so what do you got as number 1, Rip?
Well, I'm gonna follow Steve DeFlitch's lead. Pathetic to me means number 1. So it's the defense, right? Our plus minus is 31st in the league. We're minus 6. Our sack rate is 30th in the league. How many tackles? I didn't watch the game, but I heard the stats.
There's a lot.
A ridiculous amount of tackles yesterday.
Although that really was only yesterday. I mean, they haven't been terrible tackling. It was really just the last game.
And I think to Chris's point, I don't see that dog mentality. I see a bunch of first round picks who aren't living up to their first round billing, and I'm seeing a bunch of overpaid guys who aren't living up to their contracts. So for me, far and away, definitely number one is our defense.
All right, Schwaber, what's yours?
For me, number one, it's Nick Sirianni. You know, like here's the bottom line. He doesn't call the offense. He doesn't call the defense. What does he do? He's apparently a CEO coach who's supposed to manage the game. Well, we saw even against the Saints, that the game that they won, we saw how poorly he managed that game. Right? And just think about this game here today, or this game against the Bucks. I mean, were there any adjustments? I mean, there was no adjustments. They were just trying to do the same thing the entire game, which wasn't working. And the reality is, I really thought, and I know, it sounds crazy. You don't want to be the team that fires somebody every year, and he did just take you to the Super Bowl a year ago. But, the bottom line is what I thought was most damning was last year when they went through that big losing streak. He just had no answers. And I see him now having no answers. And, think about it. It's like, you change the coordinators. You got a new offensive coordinator, you got a new defensive coordinator, but you have the same head coach. What sense does that even make? And I just feel like, think about it this way. If you're the CEO coach, well, then one of the things that a CEO coach is supposed to do, it's the motivation, right? He gets the guys ready to play. They're prepared. Well, they weren't prepared yesterday, 24-0 before we could blink, so they're not prepared. He's not making good in-game decisions. All the fourth down calls recently, particularly against the Saints. He's even mentioning that, as a head coach, as a CEO head coach, you do have the ability to override a play. So even when he overrides a play, he gets it wrong, as he took credit for the non-tush push and, flip outside to Barkley, which failed because he didn't want Kellen Moore to get, screamed at about that. So what exactly does he do well? And then probably the most damning thing of all, and look, I hate, usually I'm not on the side of the players in this type of thing, but it's pretty clear that his relationship with Nick Sirianni is not good.
You mean with Jalen?
Yeah. I mean, did you hear what Jalen said yesterday in his press conference?
No,
so, he was basically served up a softball by Elliott Shore Parks. And he basically said, so Jalen, now that you have the bye week coming up, do you think that, you and Nick will get together and, start trying to put your two heads together and come up with, a better plan for the offense to work? And he just goes, we have our moments. Like, what the hell does that mean? What the hell does that mean? Like, that's an easy question to answer. It's yes, of course. Right? You know what I mean? It's like, what's even going on? I just feel like, and I think what it is I think that the players have lost confidence in Sirianni. I think the thing with Sirianni was all of his silliness and his idiocy. It was all fun when they were winning, right? But now that you're not winning anymore, it's just not fun, and the people and the players just don't take him seriously. Okay. So that's my number one. What's your number one, Chris?
Okay, so now to recap, because I tend to forget while Mark is on a rant. Rube was what was it, Rube?
It was coaching, offense,
defense. Jalen Hurts coaching, Jalen Hurts defense, right?
Yep.
Schwaber was what?
Defense,
Jalen Hurts coaching.
But really more, but specifically Sirianni.
And I get it. I was Jalen Hurts defense. And I'm going to agree with you on coaching, but I'm going to agree for a different reason. I think that anytime, and I've said this for years, you guys, but way back when I was a Redskins fan, I always said when you have a new head coach come into a franchise, the best that you can hope for that first year is 500, back when we had 16 games. That's the best you can hope for. Anything more than that is a bonus, because new head coach means completely new system, new players, new staff. Takes a little while to adjust. Now, this time around, they didn't bring in a new head coach, but this is year 2. But defensive coordinator number 3, offensive coordinator number 3, and the coach stepping back and saying, oh, I'm going to leave my hands off and only step in when I feel it's necessary. So I don't think all of these guys are on the same page yet. I don't know if that means that they will sync up going forward, but because you would think that's why it's important at the end of a season to make these changes early and not wait, because then you can start to work together on game planning and personnel issues. But what I see is a team that has literally, when you change the 2 coordinators, to me, 2 coordinators equal 1 head coach. I mean, yes, you have the head coach, who Mark likes to say CEO, and that is correct. But at the same time, you have a head coach of the offense and a head coach of the defense. And Vic Fangio is old school. And so he's instituting some things that these guys are most likely not used to. So they're missing assignments. They're missing gaps. They're not in the right place. You know, when they're playing zone defense, they're leaving those spaces too wide. When they're playing man, sometimes they're confused on who they're really supposed to cover or if they're supposed to switch at a certain point. And when they're on offense, there's no game plan around. I mean, Barkley didn't have a bad game. He rushed for 84 yards. But, you know, your number 1 offensive lineman goes down. And so you plug that hole. But what do you do to make up for the difference, in fact, that you got a Pro Bowler, a perennial Pro Bowler, potentially a Hall of Famer, and, you know, he's gone. So how do you adjust the game plan for that? It's less about, does Nick Sirianni get along with Jalen Hurts? I think that's a soundbite. I mean, it may very well be true. And yes, you can document that when a head coach and a quarterback come to odds, most often than not, there can be problems. But I think that it's really more an issue of the coaching staff is not on the same page. You know, they built this team with the attitude that they're going to be able to jump out to early leads, and then they're going to be able to hold the other team from scoring too many points. Even if they jump out to a 42-point lead, their goal is the other team can only score 41. And they just don't seem to be on the same page. And until you get that coaching staff on the same page, it doesn't matter how much talent you have. The results are going to be very inconsistent. Last week, the defense played really well, held New Orleans to 12 points. This week, they were very porous. They let Baker Mayfield, who seems to love playing in Tampa Bay, throw for 347 yards, and they barely got to him. So well, I agree with you, Mark. It's number 1 problem is coaching. I'm just not laying it all on Sirianni. That's all.
I want to leave you with a comment from one of our biggest fans, Steve Flitch.
Yeah, please do. Please.
That actually will maybe help us leave on a positive note. A Steelers fan says, trade to the Steelers Sirianni and Hurts for Fields and Tomlin, and they'll win a Super Bowl next year.
Yeah, well, he doesn't like Tomlin.
Well, yeah, you know what? It's funny though, because that's essentially though that's what I'm saying is that, but I disagree with the Sirianni part of it. I think Hurts needs the right coach. That's what I think he needs.
Right.
So let's talk some.
Wait. Steve also says the fans are too
fickle with a PH.
And Leslie Lemmer, she chimes in. She's watching. Big fan. It's a good thing you got her on board, Rube. She says it's time he's got to go when talking about Sirianni, and that when the Lions are more exciting to watch than the Eagles, you've got a problem. I do want to chime in here on this Jaden Daniels conversation, only because the Commanders are now 3-1. They've scored the most points in the NFC East, but their defense, like I've been saying all year, has led up the second most points. They don't have a defense. All I can say about Jaden Daniels is pump the brakes on this guy. We watched what happened to RG3. He is very similar to RG3. Now he's a little bigger, but just as skinny. What concerns me about him is, can he hold up through all of this? So I wouldn't worry too much right now. We're a quarter of the way through the season. There's not a lot of tape on him yet. And he does drop dimes on receivers when he's getting hit. He has some ridiculous throws. But remember the year that Jaden in 2022, when Jaden Hurts finally found his footing, man, he looked pretty good. And if I was going to pick a quarterback right now who would last long, now Hurts has an injury issue in his past as well, but I wouldn't put too much stock in what Jaden Daniels is doing yet. That's just coming from a guy who watches him.
Give me CJ Stroud. I don't know if you guys have watched this guy throw the ball.
Yes.
But the difference between his arm and accuracy and Jalen Hurts is like watching the major leagues versus the minor leagues.
If Jalen Hurts has an issue, I think it is his accuracy. I think you're right.
At times.
Arm strength and accuracy.
Well, every NFL quarterback is accurate, when it comes to as compared to the guys that don't make it. They can all throw the ball, through a very small tire into a bucket. They can all do that. It's how accurate can they be when they're moving, when they've got all that scrum around them. And I think Hurts does have a little bit of an issue with that because he likes to move around a lot, and that just creates a constant issue.
All right, let's move on to It's Red October.
All right. Well, before we do that, we want to remind everybody that they're watching the Sports Porch Philadelphia if they're watching live on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and X all over the world. And you can catch the Sports Porch Philadelphia podcast. We drop it right after the show on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you get your friggin' podcasts. There, I saved that for you, Schwaber. Yeah. So page 2.
And watch it from anywhere. I mean, yes. our ratings are booming in Budapest.
Yes, yes.
And hey, we'll take all the Budapest fans we can get.
Yes, yes. And Istanbul, in case you didn't know that.
Yeah, Istanbul. Yes. Okay, so Rube, so Phillies have the second best record in all of baseball. A little weak in the last series or two once they clinched the bye. How do you feel going in? I got to be honest with you. I'm not as optimistic as I hope I would be. So where are you sitting at right now with the playoffs upon us?
It's funny. The past couple of years, we had to come in as a wild card, and it was us against the world, and we rode that, to a couple games of winning the World Series, and then last year just kind of fell apart against Arizona. And I think as long-term, suffering Phillies fans, it's almost like, I don't know how we're going to look playing from in front and leading the way. And we figured out a way to win the National League East, kind of going away this year. And so it gives me a little confidence that we were able to go kind of wire to wire on that. Listen, I think for me, if you know what you're going to get out of Wheeler, you know what you're going to get out of Nola for half the game, right? How many times in the past month as the fifth inning came and you're like, oh no, it's the second or third time through and he falls apart. So if we can get playoff Nola and we can get playoff or regular season Wheeler, to me, it comes down to how our 3 and 4 pitch, right? So the Suarez and Sanchez, are they going to be effective enough to keep us in the game and allow our bats who need to be consistent? And if those things happen, I think we're in good shape.
Well, here's my concern. My concern is Ranger Suarez. When the Phillies were the best team in baseball for the first half of the season, a good part of that was due to Ranger. Ranger was like 10-1. He had like a sub 2 ERA, and he got hurt, and he took about a month off, and he's been back, and really he hasn't been the same since he's been back. And to be honest, I don't even feel like you can count on him at all. Like I feel like Sanchez is now clearly the number three, if not the number two, if you want to go righty lefty, righty lefty. And to be honest, I think Suarez starts game 4 with a quick hook in mind. And that's not a good position to be in. When you only have, I'm saying we only have 3 starters that we can count on. And then of course, the other issue is just the issue that has always plagued this team, which is that they're kind of streaky, right? And they had this, look, even though they had clinched the bye, they had 3 games to win against the Nationals, which are a terrible team. And if they win those 3 games, they had a chance to be the 1 seed, right? And what happened? Like the first 2 games, like they could barely get a hit, and like thankfully they scored 9 runs in the last game. But the bottom line is it's like you just never know when they're going to hit, when they're not going to hit. So I just think that it's going to be tough. I mean, it's really going to be tough. I look at some of these other teams, and even though the Phillies maybe have a better record, even though they have, the experience maybe now compared to some other teams in the playoffs, I just think that there's some other teams that are a little scarier. Like even like take like the Mets, for example, who won that first game today, by the way, so they're in. It was a crazy game, by the way. I don't know if you followed that, but it was
I heard,
insane.
yeah,
It
eight
was
to seven.
yeah, it was an insane game. But like, hey, the Mets are very scary. If you had to play them. The Dodgers, of course, are scary. I mean, you got Mookie Betts and Shohei Ohtani. And then hey, even if you're fortunate enough to get to the World Series, you're probably looking at the Yankees, with Aaron Judge, who seems like he can just hit a baseball like a billion miles. So it's going to be really tough. I mean, I feel like this kind of should have been a year where we go into the playoffs and we say, "Hey, we're the best team in baseball. We're going to get it done this year." But I don't know. I don't know. I think there's a lot of opportunity for a lot of teams in the playoffs.
Go ahead, Rube.
What
will it take to go all the way? That's the question. Just in case you forgot, what will it take to go all the way?
Yeah, let's answer that, Rube. What do you think the Phillies have to do for them to go all the way?
I have it in my notes when I was thinking about the show, and you said the word streaky hitting. I think we have to hit consistently. And I'm hoping that one less round this year means it's a shorter amount of time in which the Phillies have to be consistent. That's number one.
Right.
I think you and I both agreed on the back part of the pitching staff with Suarez and Sanchez have to keep us in games for our hitting to win. And I get a little nervous about the back of the lineup. This Rojas guy just scares the hell out of me. He can catch everything, but I think we're going to lose more games with him leaving people on base. So between our center field and our left field, we've got to get production out of at least one of them. If we get production out of at least one of them, our bats are consistent, and we get Ranger and Sanchez to not pitch us out of ball games, I think we got as good a lineup and as good a staff as anybody in the majors. Yeah, so I'll leave it with that.
I go back to something you guys were talking about earlier, and the fact that they did secure a bye. And then Schwaber, you mentioned the last series against Washington where they dropped 2 out of 3, and that, effectively they were out of the 1 seed. I don't think that matters. I think what matters for the Phillies this year, because it was a monumental effort to win the NL East. That took a monumental effort. There were a lot of question marks going into the season around pitching. Would Bryce Harper be healthy? Would Trey Turner show up? Well, Bryce Harper was relatively healthy, played 145 games. He did hit 30 home runs. Trey Turner showed up. He led the team, 295 average, 21 home runs. I won't talk about anybody else because lots of guys had great games. Schwarber, his average was 248. The pitching performed really well. I think the number one key this year is rest. And I think they're going to get it because they get a bye. And I think that as a team, if I'm the coach of that team, if I'm the manager, if I'm Topper, what I'm doing when I go into this and we realize who we're going to end up playing, and of course, Steve says, I do have a comment about this. Steve says, don't play the Mets. That's what it will take. I'm going to comment on that in a second. But if I'm Topper, I'm going into this particular offseason and I am resting these guys and getting them as healthy as absolutely possible. And then I'm having a team meeting where I say, we're not going to overthink this. We're going to go out there and we're going to crush our opponent. That's the mentality they have to have going into this. Because like you said, Rube, it was them against the world the last couple of years. Okay, now they get a bye. Now they weren't the number 1 seed, but they get a bye, and now it's the world against them. So now's when you, pardon the pun, have to step up to the plate and show the world. So now you go play baseball. And that's all it's going to take. And I do think one of the most dangerous teams is the Mets for them, only because, first of all, the Mets made a late season push and they clinched the playoffs. They're riding a high, but they have to play a series before they get to Philadelphia, if that's even possible through the seeding. So, the Mets are the dangerous team to come out of the East. But I think the important thing is that they rest and they come back and they start a brand new season. I think that's a huge positive this year for the Phillies. Now, I did you answer the question, Schwab? Because there's one thing that I want to bring up. I want to have a little debate about. It doesn't have anything to do with the Phillies, but it's baseball. So
I didn't answer the question. But it's very similar. I think that what they're going to need is like I'm already convinced that Ranger is not going to be great in the postseason. I'm not saying he can't go 5 innings and maybe give up 1 or 2 runs, but
that would be great.
Yeah, I would accept that.
I'm not expecting anything great from him. I actually feel like the key to the starting pitching is actually Sanchez, because we know Wheeler's going to give us a good game. We feel pretty good that Nola is going to give us a good game. We don't really know with Sanchez, but Sanchez has been a baller this year. So if he comes out and pitches well, you got 3 guys in your starting rotation that are dealing it. You're going to be pretty hard to beat. I also think too, one of the strengths the Phillies have is their bullpen. Between Hoffman and Strom and Estevez, and Kerkering, it's a really good bullpen. So as long as Topper manages that correctly, I think that, we've got the pitching to get it done. And as far as, the hitting, look, you always need some unsung heroes to kind of come up and, you need a Marsh home run here or there or something like that. Right. But the reality is I need Schwarber, Turner, and Harper to dominate. I need them to be hitting home runs all postseason long. And, we can't get into when the Phillies struggle, it's when they get into that chase mode. We can't get into chase mode. We can't, everybody can't just swing at the first pitch because they feel like, well, that's the best pitch they're going to get the hit. We got to have patient at bats. And I think if we do that, we'll do well.
That's why I was saying rest and don't do anything different. Don't overthink it. Rest up, go play baseball. Okay, so I heard this on a local sports. Actually, it wasn't. There's this guy named Mark Ryan. He's on the Infinity Sports Network. Have you listened to this guy?
No.
Okay, if you get a chance, seriously, guys, if you get a chance, he's on Saturdays at night on the Infinity. Used to be Odyssey, Infinity Sports Network. Mark Ryan, by far one of the best sports guys out there to listen to. So he brought this up, and I don't want this to take too long because we got to get to basketball and hockey and what we're watching. But I have to pose this to you guys. Shohei Ohtani, first 50-50 guy. Okay, so what he brought up was I'm gonna change this for people watching just so they understand the subject that we're talking about. What he brought up was the fact that, yes, Shohei Ohtani is a fantastic baseball player. We all know that. I personally shy away from calling him one of the greatest of all time because he's going to have to do it for a long time. But for all intents and purposes, he's the best right now and one of the better players you've ever seen. 50-50, though. This is what Mark Ryan said. All of those things aside, yes, he's a great player. Yes, he could end up being one of the greatest of all time. But don't try to jam down my throat that he is a legitimate 50-50 guy, because since 2022, when you instituted a pitch clock, when you limited the number of pickoff attempts, throwing over to first base or second base, trying to hold the runner, and you enlarged the bases 2.5 inches, stolen bases in the major leagues have increased by 41%. They were at 2,487 stolen bases total in 2022. 2023, they jumped up to 3,500 plus, and 2024, it's over 3,600. So obviously the home runs are the home runs, but how do you think Ricky Henderson, Vince Coleman, Alfonso Soriano, Lou Brock, you enlarge the bases, you put a timing issue into it, and you limit the number of pickoff attempts, and of course stolen bases are going to increase. Ricky Henderson
and you give him a glove about this big,
right?
To slide in with.
He added that too. So the question is, and it's an open-ended question, and a caller called in and said, and I hadn't even considered this. I just heard 50-50, and not being a Dodgers fan, I was like, good for him. First 50-50 guy. He's a great player. But when I heard this argument, I thought he's got a point. So a caller called in and basically said, there's another sportscaster in Detroit who calls it the pitch clock era. So you would have to say he's the first guy in the pitch clock era to get 50-50. Look, Barry Bonds would have been at 50-65. I mean, Vince Coleman would have stolen 120 bases every year. So how do you
actually, I'll actually jump in here, and this may actually surprise you, because I do think that there are some things that have led to it being a little bit easier to steal bases. But I think this is overthink. I think, because I'll give you another look at it. So for example, when Trey Turner came to the Phillies, and his first season last year was, the season with the pitch clock and how stealing was going to be easier, right? And Trey Turner routinely steals, I think this year I only had in the 20s, but usually steals like 30 plus bases a year. They were talking about like last year, like Trey Turner was going to steal like 70, 80 bases, and he didn't. So, I still think you got to steal them. And so I think it counts. And I wouldn't say it's the pitch clock era. That's not the same as steroids.
I think there is something to the pitch clock and the size of the base and all those factors. I do. However, if the discussion is Ohtani one of the best of all time, I don't necessarily look at the 50-50. I look at him maybe coming a smidge short of the Triple Crown. And so there's plenty of other facts that support it. But Chris, I agree. Show me that consistently over a number of years.
Right.
I care less about how many stolen bases.
Yeah, you got to have 10 years plus, but then somebody else made a very good counter argument to that, and I agree. I mean, you can't really designate an era, but it's still at the same time, it's a valid point. It's a valid point. It is easier to steal bases now, and baseball basically legislated that away by using analytics. And the counterpoint that another caller made was, because of analytics, because of the fact that they took they're not allowed to do the shift for a year or so before they instituted the pitch clock or whatever it was. The coaches would tell players, because analytics basically say that stealing a base is a low probability thing, that they told players not to run, like Julio Rodriguez in Seattle. He's known for being fast and stealing bases. Well, he was instructed not to run. So could he have stolen 50 or 60 bases in those years prior to the pitch clock if he was given the green light because of his abilities, because of his athletic ability? So that's a good counterpoint to that. There were a lot of guys who could steal bases that were instructed not to, or they weren't given the green light because the analytics said now's not a good time to steal.
Okay.
All right. Okay, you guys.
On.
Let's move on. Philadelphia Beautiful, the Sports Porch, live on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and X. Of course, you can go back and watch it on YouTube. It's at the Philadelphia Sports Porch on YouTube, and we drop the podcast right after the show on the iHeartRadio app or anywhere you get your friggin' podcast. And there it is, youtube.com at Philadelphia Sports Porch. Moving on to page 3, we're gonna go onto the ice now, Schwaber.
Yes, Michkov Mania Mother Russia has come to Philadelphia. So pretty exciting, Rube. It is pretty exciting. We have not had a player of this skill level since Eric Lindros. And it's great when you can just like put on a game and you see 3 highlights and you're like, oh yeah, like those are the kinds of things that only the best players in the league can do. So, it's great. It's great. I mean, look, it's just preseason, but 6 points in 3 preseason games, game winner in overtime, really nice toe drag, passes, setting up passes between people's legs, having sort of like, I actually think this is very like Sidney Crosby, like just like always sitting right at the goal for the little tap in, like, and you're just wondering like, well, like, how come nobody's on him? Well, it's just because he's that good. He's there. Now Steve says Mitchie Mania, best player in the league, pump the brakes. I say we go for 102 this year. Let's beat Crosby's first year, 102 points. Let's get it.
I'm with Steve. Pump the brakes. Yes, we are long-suffering Flyers fans. Yes, this is the most excitement of a new player since Lindros. But I know we're running short on time. I say talk to me when we're 10 to 20 games in, and I'll be a little bit more excited. But listen, it's nice to have something to get excited for with the Flyers. I think our trajectory definitely, I'm hopeful that we've already hit rock bottom, and up and to the right is the right trajectory. But listen, Stanley Cup champs, are out of the East, and those teams from Florida have showed us a thing or two. So I think we pump the brakes. Let's be excited, but let's talk in a couple months.
Yeah. So in this brief conversation about hockey and the Flyers, I've heard 102 points, eclipsing Sidney Crosby's rookie year, and the phrase Stanley Cup champs. So yeah, I say pump the brakes. Page 4.
Why not though? We can dream. Isn't that what being a sports fan is all about? Dreaming.
You dream every year, all year long, all you want, Schwaber. Okay, page 4. The Knicks in a surprise trade. You guys are the basketball guys. Take it away.
Yeah. So Rube, this one kind of caught me off guard. Kind of surprised me here.
Schwabi.
Oh,
I heard it.
Well, I feel good. I feel good about this. You feel bad about this? I feel good about it.
I feel good for the Knicks about this.
No, I feel very good for the Sixers. So
Okay, go ahead.
for those of you who don't know, the Knicks made a trade. They traded with Minnesota. They got center Carl Anthony Towns and traded away Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo.
The big ragu.
Yeah. So look, here's just my 2 cents on it. Like, I think on paper you can see what the Knicks were doing. They're saying we have to contend against Joel Embiid, so let's get a big in here, right? But what they have failed to realize is that Joel Embiid owns Carl Anthony Towns. Like, every time they play, he completely dominates him. And part of the reason why Embiid dominates him is Carl Anthony Towns is soft. I mean, he's out there shooting 3-pointers. He's not getting down low. He's a soft dude. And that's why the Minnesota Timberwolves couldn't get further than they got this year, because he's freaking soft. And you take Julius Randle, who, look, I get it. He wasn't around the second half of last year, but is the heart and soul of that team. And he's a power forward who plays dirty, hard basketball. You take him out, all of a sudden they're easier to play against. Dante DiVincenzo, Mr. 3-pointers raining from the sky, Team Villanova in New York City. No more. No more. We don't have to worry about you anymore. Good.
Mark,
Good riddance. Good riddance.
Mark,
So I think we come out ahead. I like it. I
Mark,
think it's
I
the Knicks.
respectfully disagree.
I think it's the Knicks overthought it.
I respectfully disagree, my friend. I love the enthusiasm. I hope you're right. But they didn't get Carl Anthony Towns to beat the Sixers. They got Carl Anthony Towns to beat the Celtics. Because at the end of the day, the Celtics are the champs. They're clearly the best team in the East. I think, Embiid, for however many games a year we play the Knicks, can dominate all he wants. The heart and the soul of that team now is Jalen Brunson. And now they've got a center to go with them. I think it's trouble. I think the Sixers fall even further behind because we are reliant upon two superstars who are injury prone. And I don't think it really matters. I think the Knicks improve themselves.
Well, we'll see. I mean, I do think, though, kind of contrary to where you're coming from, I think one thing about NBA basketball is it's very much up in the air. Like, the Celtics were the best team last year, and they did win the whole thing. But they're the same team basically that lost like the previous 3 years too. They'll lose. Like, they're going to be just like the Bucks. The Bucks had their one championship, and now every year they lose. So I see the Celtics losing. I don't see them as any kind of dynasty. I mean, Jason Tatum, throws up garbage games all the time. I'm not even real. To be honest, I'm actually legitimately more concerned with the Knicks than I am the Celtics, and that's just that.
That's just that.
Okay, and Steve says Mark is all excitement and Rube is logic. So, we know how that works out most of the time.
Thanks, Amy. Good support. Good support of my wife there.
Hey, woman's shouting the
that
truth.
was Amy. Sorry. Yeah, that was Amy. Amy says that Rube is logic and Mark is excitement. I'm sure she sees that excitement all the time. Okay, one last thing with basketball. We have to say farewell to Dikembe Mutombo, who passed away today at the age of 58. He died from brain cancer.
Not in my house. Not in my house.
He was exactly. He had an 18-year career. He was an 8-time All-Star, 4-time Defensive Player of the Year. His 3,289 blocks are second all time. He played at Georgetown, right? Mm-hmm. And he was the follow-up to Patrick Ewing at Georgetown.
And he was on the Sixers team that made the finals and lost to the Lakers in 2001.
That's right. So illustrious career. We wish his family prayers and all the best. I myself have experienced a relative who had brain cancer and passed away, and my father a few years ago. It's not a fun thing to watch, but he sure as hell was fun to watch on the basketball floor. So
he was.
Yes. Thank you, and rest in peace. Steve says lots of talent in the NBA, no dynasties in the near future. And we're going to move on now to what we are watching. You guys each have one. I don't have one. This is all about you. So what we're watching, what is that? Well, here on the Sports Porch Philadelphia, there's a lot of streaming services out there. It gets more and more confusing every day because some of them get gobbled up by others. Some of them keep the same one. Some of them have a different name, but the same logo, Peacock. And it's really hard to figure out what to watch and what not to watch. So what we do is we got a lot of time on our hands. We're old guys. We realize we're not going to be out there playing flag football and, baseball.
I don't think anybody does that anymore. They just sit and text.
Yeah, that too. That takes energy for me, honestly. I'm like, well, it's like people our age, it's like one word answers. Yes, no, maybe, the occasional F off, leave me alone. Anyway, so we tell you what to watch and what you shouldn't watch. And this week we're going to start with Rube. Rube, this is an oldie but goodie, isn't it?
It is.
It is.
So mine is The Shield. I just started watching this. We were looking for a new series to watch, and we like police shows, and someone at work recommended it, and it's really good. I like Chickless, whatever his name is. He plays a great dirty cop. I don't know anyone who does it better than him. We also like one of the guys that's in his strike team or whatever they are. If you ever watched Justified, did you guys ever watch Justified?
No.
That's another good one, but there's a guy from that show who plays like a bad guy who's also in that. It's really good. We're halfway through the first season. It's really compelling. It's entertaining, and it's definitely worth a watch. An oldie but a goodie.
Now, what are you watching that on, Rube?
Hulu.
Okay. Yeah,
Hulu.
it's like 15 or 20 years old, right?
Yeah, I think it's the early. It's in the 2000s, the early 2000s.
Yeah. Wasn't
that's
it
old? That's old school.
It was originally on Fox, right?
Yep.
I like when you watch those old ones and you see like the old technology.
Yeah. I watched The Wire recently.
Right.
The HBO. They had
they're using payphones.
Yeah, and payphones.
Hey Chris, what is The Wire? Because I get those confused between The Shield and The Wire. I'm like, I think one of these was supposed to be really good, so I picked The Shield.
Yeah, no, The Wire is really good too, but The Wire was on HBO. And it was in the 90s, and it was set in Baltimore, and it was about the cops and the drug trades in Baltimore that involved the mob and dirty cops and all that kind of stuff. And it was I don't remember how many seasons. I want to say it was 5 or 6 seasons, but I actually I didn't watch it the first time. I watched it last year for the first time. It's really good too, Rube. It's worth it.
By the way, breaking news. The Braves have won game 2. So in the playoffs are the Braves and the Mets, and the Diamondbacks are eliminated.
Now, when you guys were saying earlier who you didn't want to play, the Phillies have really struggled with Arizona. I'm glad to see them.
Yeah, it's good to see them out. Good to see them out.
That's good. Okay, what we're watching, Mark. Mark's on a movie binge lately. So Mark went to see
Never Let Go
with Halle Berry, one of my favorite Hollywood stars.
Yes, Halle Berry. I'll tell you what, this look, this is one where you're going to see it 50-50 down the line. Whether it's critics, whether it's just regular viewers, 50% of the people are going to say that they thought this was great, and 50% of the people are going to say this was a terrible mess, right? I would lean more towards I thought it was great side of the coin. It was just different. Like what's kind of interesting about it was this, like, okay, so all kinds of things that I like in movies, right? Apocalypse, end of the world. Okay. Supernatural, right?
You mean like Trolls?
Not Trolls, but supernatural.
Okay, all right.
Okay, and horror. Okay. I think at the end of the movie, I don't quite know which one it is. They're kind of all a part of it. And so it's just very interesting, and kind of like I hope that there's another one, because the way that it ends, it kind of leads you to kind of like the next, maybe like the next chapter. But it's just really interesting. So it's real quick. It's just there's this family, and they are in the middle of the woods, basically in like a log cabin home, and there's danger outside. We don't know exactly what it is, but we've been sort of led to believe that something has made the world go crazy, and there's crazy people out there that are just waiting to kill you. And so they set up this rope system where somehow, if you're attached to this house by way of the rope, you can't be hurt. And so it was just really interesting, all the kind of crazy stuff that went on. So I'd recommend it. Look, again, it's like, this is like M. Night Shyamalan type stuff. Like, if you like his good stuff, then you would like this. Again, M. Night Shyamalan has been a little disappointing lately. It would have been good for him if this was one of his.
All right. Never Let Go. That's a movie currently in theaters, but pretty soon probably streaming somewhere near you. Any last thoughts, boys?
That's it. When we talk to you next time, there will be 2 games on in the playoff series of the Phillies, and Eagles will definitely not lose next weekend. No doubt about it.
And the puck drops this week as well.
Is it?
For real.
I like it. Okay.
All right. That's it, man. Well, for the Grand Schwabini, for Rube, I'm your technical director. You have been watching, if you're watching live, the Sports Porch Philadelphia on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and X all over the world. And of course, if you missed any part of this or just want to catch up while you're driving to work or driving to the grocery store or, I don't know, driving to pick up your kids, you can always catch the podcast on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you get
your frickin' podcasts.
I'm your technical director. We'll see you next week. I am out.
Final word. By the way, Rube, Jimmy Butler once said Karl Anthony Towns is trash. Get me out of here.